to another video. So as an oil painter, I work with a wide variety of oil paint brushes. And oftentimes I get asked a lot of questions in regards to what kind of brushes I use, along with how they can be used to create different strokes and textures in my paintings. So today we're going to be discussing just that. So figuring out what kind of brushes you like comes down to the artist's individual taste, along with what you gravitate towards depending on what kind of art that you're producing. So for instance, whenever I started painting with oils for the first time, I still used a lot of acrylic paint brushes because it was something that I was familiar with, and in my work today, I still prefer using a lot of acrylic brushes over oils sometimes, but let's go ahead and get into it. I'm going to be discussing a wide range of different types of brushes today and how they're shaped, how they can be used, and also giving little examples of what effects they can make. So let's go.
Paintbrushes are available in sizes 0 to 10, which provides an artist with a variety of strokes and brushes to experiment with. The main thing to remember is that even though brushes come in different sizes, it's the shape of the bristles that determines what purpose the brush will be used for. Broadly speaking, brushes come in mainly two different bristle types: natural and synthetic. Natural brushes are typically made with badger, hog, or even camel hair, and synthetic brushes are made with nylon or polyester. First, let's start with one of my personal favorites, and that's the liner brush. The liner brush is great for creating those really thin, sharp, accurate lines. This brush can work really well for details towards the end of your painting, along with signing your artwork. The size of this brush can almost act as a pen and a tool for your art. Typically, I like to save my liner brushes or my detail brushes closer towards the end of my artwork when I'm adding a lot of detail. Next, we have the rigger brush. So the rigger brush that I have here in this example is actually made with synthetic mongoose hair, which is stiffer than sable, yet softer than bristle. The rigger brush shape is similar to a round brush, but with much longer hair. Its tuft is longer than usual, so it can hold more paint and water at once. This paintbrush is commonly used for hassle-free long lines. So in these examples here, I'm using a combination of larger and smaller brushes so you can see kind of how they differ depending on which one I grab for. So next we have a spotter brush. A miniature or spotter brush is a round brush that has had the hair clamped at the fullest part, which is kind of like the belly of the paintbrush. So that hair emerging from the ferrule is much shorter than that of round brushes. The shorter hair has less flexibility and therefore can be controlled a little bit better. It's designed to hold a large amount of color and still give the finest of points on a small brush. It's very useful for detailing painting in all mediums, so it's versatile whether you're using watercolors, acrylics, oils, gouache, etc. But it's especially well suited for creating fine spots or for stippling effects. Moving on, we have our round brush. Now, this is a pretty common brush in an oil painter's arsenal. I think it's kind of nice to have a combination of both small and sharp round brushes along with larger, fluffier round brushes. The small, sharp round brush can create some really nice line work and can hold slightly more paint than a liner brush. However, since the tip of these brushes are rounded, it won't give you as sharp of a line as a liner brush. It creates beautiful rounded textures and patterns. Now, having a larger and softer round brush is an amazing way to create some non-repetitive, sporadic texture when lightly dabbing this across the canvas or whatever surface you're painting on. I use this brush in a lot of greenery, tree, and bush work, as well as making those really unique textures in crashing wave foam. This brush is truly amazing for creating some really precise details due to its smaller size. So another brush I'd like to mention is the short Filbert brush. This brush is slightly flat and oval shaped, but it still has a nice little point. So this is great for blending and creating some soft edges around natural objects. I oftentimes like to use this brush when I'm creating specific shapes such as flower petals, distant leaves, or those highlighted curves on the top of clouds. The shape of filberts offer the painter a variety of ways to paint depending on what side of the brush you are using and the pressure that you're applying. You can go from a straight line to a swift curved line in just a matter of seconds. Next, we have our stroke brush. This brush is a long, flat brush traditionally used for lettering or borders. If you use this brush on its chiseled edge, it will help you to produce fine lines, or you can use this brush flat to create long, wide strokes for lettering, stripes, or blocking in smaller artworks. You can also use this brush to make soft, feathered-like edges, so if you don't like seeing harsh or crisp edges on some parts of your painting, then feathering will give them soft and fine fanned out edges. So as you can see here in this example, if you kind of have a really soft touch whenever you're using this brush, it'll create multiple really small lines close together, so it can be really good for painting hair or blades of grass, things of that nature. Moving on, we have the Deerfoot Stippler brush. So this brush isn't used as commonly in my artwork as some of the previously mentioned brushes. However, it can still create some pretty cool effects in your work. The Deerfoot Stippler brush is a texturizing brush used for creating fur or foliage. The amount of pressure you apply during this pouncing or stippling will determine the overall look and color value of your painting. As you can see here, you can create lots of tiny little specks fairly quick with this particular brush. Now, one of the brushes I'm constantly grabbing for is my angular brushes. These are essentially flat brushes but with a sharp angle. I use these brushes to cover a lot of the blocking in and groundwork when I start my paintings. Angled brushes are super versatile because you can paint from thin to thick in just a matter of seconds simply by rotating the brush around. Or you could use the tip to create nice points in your artwork. I love angular brushes because of the amount of control you have when using it. I feel like I can paint almost anything under the sun with this brush. Now, we certainly can't forget about our fan brushes and blenders. I use two different sizes here. The larger fan brush is a beast at blending due to its width and stiffer bristles. Now, using a smaller fan brush is amazing for creating those iconic Bob Ross pine tree bells that we're all so familiar with. This is also a wonderful brush for foliage and tree work. It's another one of those brushes that its shape is extremely versatile depending on how you rotate it. Fan brushes will create a variety of patterns and textures. Next we have our Mop Brush. Now this brush is my go-to for creating soft blending. This is a large, fluffy brush meant for achieving some of the softest blending that you can get with a paintbrush. I have a wide variety of sizes to cover both larger and smaller areas depending on what part of the painting I'm working in. But I know that if there's an area that I need some blending done, I can just change up the size of the mop brush I'm using to help soften up those areas. Next, we have our flat brushes. The flat brush is good for, you guessed it, making thicker, straight, flat lines. The shape of the brush is square, and with its flexible ends, it's able to hold a lot of paint. When used flat, you can make long strokes and are well suited for blending and painting in large areas. The tip and the sides can also be used for more delicate straight lines and small touches. So you can also see here that the surface area that you're working on, along with the amount of pressure that you're applying, can really create a lot of changes depending on what brushes you're using. So simply by not putting a lot of pressure on this brush when I'm painting, you can see that it kind of creates some like cool little textures in this canvas paper that I'm using. So for the 12th brush we're going to mention here, we have our Dagger Striper brush. The sharp bladed edge allows you to achieve some extremely beautiful feathered outlines. You can turn this brush on its side and it can be used in a phenomenal way to blend your paints. The curvature in this brush also allows you to pick up a lot of paint and create thicker textures with your paint. You can also use the very tip of this brush to create some stippling effects and add even more detail into your work. The curved shape of this brush really helps to create some super cool line work when rotating the brush from thick to thin strokes. It's kind of similar to calligraphy. I really do love me a good dagger brush. All right, and then we have our bright brushes. Now, if I'm starting a new piece, I usually start by grabbing my bright brush, and that's because this brush is incredible for coverage, as you want for blocking in your paintings. Bright brushes are another example of a flat bristled brush, but with some different characteristics. Due to their shorter bristle length, brights generate more resistance with the surface, making them ideal for applying short, strong strokes of color. And then we have our long filbert. Now, the long filbert is essentially the same as the regular filbert, but this brush can hold a lot more paint and create longer drawn out lines. However, it still has the same curvature shape as the short filbert. So we also have a round blender brush here, and as the name suggests, this is a great tool for blending. This brush is incredibly soft like the Mop Brush, but has a lot of bounce and pull that will allow you to move the paint around easily on the canvas for flawless blending. Since this brush is also a touch smaller than the Mop brushes, it can be a great choice for blending with extreme precision in those harder to reach areas. And then we have the Chisel blender. So the Chisel blender is kind of similar to a flat brush, except for it's going to be shorter bristles and it has a chiseled end. So this is a perfect brush for creating some nice blends in some of those smaller, harder to reach areas, as well as creating textures such as choppy fur, finishing sharp edges, feathers, and fitting into tight spaces. So next I just wanted to show you guys this Gamvar varnishing brush, and this is the brush that I always use for varnishing. I use the same brush each time. This is its main purpose in my studio. I would recommend keeping your brushes for painting and your brushes for varnishing as two separate entities. I like to use this brush because it has a little bit softer bristles and it has a very large flat surface, so it can cover a lot of groundwork whenever I'm varnishing. Now, I know that this is a personal preference. There's some artists out there who prefer to have stiffer bristles with their varnishing brushes so that they can really scrub the varnish in well to their paintings, but I find this brush to be my favorite for varnishing my artwork. Now lastly, I just wanted to show you guys this palette knife. I know it's not a brush, but I wanted to mention the palette knife because it can be an amazing option for mixing your oil paints and even applying some sweet textures to your work. So if you want to get some like thicker and posture textures, such as like creating some of the foam and crashing waves, or if you're doing more like abstract artwork, then palette knives can be a really great tool for that. But I really just use my palette knives oftentimes for mixing up my paints. Another little tip I just want to add real quick is to keep your old beat up paintbrushes. Some of my favorite brushes I use now are the ones that I've destroyed, and they create some really cool, unique patterns that I couldn't get by obtaining a new brush. So if you're new to painting, don't feel the need to break the bank on all of these individual brushes that I mentioned above. There are some amazing brush sets that come with everything you need to get started. I still use brushes from these sets today. Remember, it's not the tool that matters as much as learning how to use them. What's important is that you just get in there and you start experimenting. That's going to be the best way to discover what works for you and your artwork. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video and learned a little something new today.